Hello, everybody, and welcome to more of one of my evergreen videos where I want to kind of get back as to why I created the channel and some of the topics that I want to bring together in this channel, which is disruption and also monetary inflation, and actually using disruption to beat monetary inflation. And monetary inflation was the thing that I didn't get early in my investing journey, and that I actually think today is of the utmost important. As I think a lot of people on the internet, in the media, um, I got I got into dividend investing, and I'm not proud of it. It's a mistake. It was a major mistake. I was interested in dividends when I started out 10 years ago, did it for a few years. I was investing in dividends, and I had plenty of reasons to like dividends. There's a lot of books about dividend growth investing. There's a entire subculture about it, like people teaching you that dividends are the way to go. And I thought they were the way to go, but they're not. Dividends, not investment advice, of course, but dividends are very, very, very problematic for a world that we live in. So let me tell you a little bit about my assumptions for investing in dividends. So I was buying dividends thinking I would get a 3% yield, 3 to 4%. I was never into the dangerous dividends like mortgage REITs, leveraged REITs. I was never into that. But, I thought I could get a 3% yield and kind of hold that company for 10, 20 years and hope for good dividend growth. So whether it's 7%, 10%, who knows, but hoping for some consistent dividend growth. And I really fell in love with the idea of, for example, Rockefeller saying, "Oh, nothing gives me more pleasure than dividend checks in the mail." And you have a lot of quotes from a lot of different people in history who are all about dividends, and they created these very virtuous names like dividends aristocrats and dividend kings. Dividend kings are companies, for example, that have paid a dividend for 50 years and raised it for 50 years. Um, and again, when you do this analysis and when you put all these criteria for dividend stocks, you end up with companies like Johnson and Johnson, Pepsi, lots of utilities like Edison, Proctor and Gamble, many banks. There's like a whole list of companies that are old world, old mode companies that have been paying this dividends for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Um, so it's kind of like if you've been around for 50 years, it should have already have rung a bell with me. It's like, how innovative are you if you've been around for 50 years? uh, but anyways, there's so much there's so much good stuff that circulates out there on dividend investing, and it's a mistake, and I quickly realized it was a mistake because uh, I never got really excited about these companies, and they're engaging in rent seeking, raising prices just because you can, not caring about the long-term well-being of your customers. I mean, look at Johnson and Johnson. Look at the lawsuit that they're having for their talc powder. Look at companies like McDonald's or Coca-Cola. Like, is this rent seeking? I mean, putting a whole bunch of sugar in a drink to get people addicted. Like, I was, sugar's addictive, fast food's addictive. I was just never really attracted by these companies, despite the fact that they had these dividends. And one thing that I really hated, again, these are my confessions. One thing that I really hated about this whole dividend investing thing is that the companies that typically fit is all about the question is, are they going to survive? Is the business going to hold up? Are they going to be around again in 10 years, 20 years? And much of the conversation whenever one of dividend stocks grows is the dividend safe? Is the dividend safe? Like, that's always the big question when investing in dividends, because a company that cuts the dividend, that's a 40% drop in value in one day if it's a major company that has been paying a dividend for a long, long time. So that was always the risk. And think about the CEO incentives of cutting that dividends. They are there. They are there. I mean, it's like it's like there's no law that says that you have to pay a dividend or anything. And there was a lot of really bad behavior, I would argue, from a lot of these companies. Like if you look at what happened with AT&T, with the split, if you look at what's happening with Johnson and Johnson, where they're doing spin-offs, United Technologies, one of them, plenty of dividend companies actually don't cut the dividend. They just do spin-offs that don't make much sense, and by doing spin-off, they get to cut the dividend by unloading a lot of fat in a smaller entity that is going to left on its own to perhaps most likely die. All right, this is what happened at IBM. Right, so these companies don't hold together. They split, and by splitting them up, you also get to cut the dividend. And it's usually so sneaky, like written small in a shareholder letter. Oh, by the way, because of these great things we're doing, we're going to cut the dividend that we had paid for 40 years. There's too much incentives for CEOs to cut that dividend. So I really believe that. I believe that I would sleep well at night because of the dividend checks coming in the mail, regardless of what was happening in the economy, in the stock market, regardless of the moods of Mr. Market. I would believe that. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was so wrong because dividend paying companies are the companies that are the most at risk for disruption. Think about this. They have earnings. They're not investing in the future. They're not investing in research. They're not investing time. They don't even believe in themselves enough to do a share buyback. They'd rather do a dividend payment, right? Some of them prioritize dividend over anti-fragility, like paying off debt. No, they'd rather keep debt, lots of debt on balance sheet that makes them fragile in order to pay a dividend. Such that if you have a disruption in the market, you end up with a company going bankrupt because they decided to keep the debt instead of paying the dividend. So instead of cutting the dividend. So if disruption arises, dividend stocks typically they can't cut their dividends, and they could, but they decide not to because the CEO would get fired, right? If you're the CEO of a dividend king who has been paying a dividend for 50 years and you cut the dividend, you're going to get fired. You're going to get your board very angry at you. You're not going to do that, even if it's necessary to the company. And so these companies often pay dividends at the cost of investing in the future, at the cost of disrupting themselves, at the cost of accepting disruption, at the cost of investing in R&D and marketing. That is oftentimes the issue that I find with dividend stocks. And from a business operation standpoint, I don't think dividends are the way to go. I really don't. And again, this is more of a personal confession type of piece. I realize that I'm going against the grain here, and there's a huge community that is pro-dividend online. I realize that. But I ask you the question of disruption. Can you think of a single company that is not at risk of being disrupted? I used to think water utilities were not at risk of getting disrupted until I did a little research and found that there was a very, very credible option to condense water out of the air with a little bit of energy. So even water utilities I can't put in the undisruptible category. Yeah? What do you think about utilities? Think about utilities that have debt maturities that are sometimes 30 years away, that invest in these plants for 30 years. And today there is a very, 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 very real disruption coming from centralized electricity in the form of photovoltaic and battery. I really believe that. The S-curve has just begun on this. I did the calculations on my house. It's only $9,000 worth of material for never having to pay a bill. Right now, the issue with solar panels is labor because those installers charge you a fortune, but those prices will come down. And so what happens if you can get someone to install solar panels on the roof for like $20,000 3 years from now, and you never have a bill again? Everybody will do this. You already have states that have declared that home builders should always put photovoltaic, mandatory. California is one of those. California has some of its problems, but it's one of those states that saying photovoltaic is mandatory. Like I used to hate photovoltaic too, by the way, which is very interesting. But when you actually dig deep into photovoltaic, you realize that that is the future. Look at what's happening with virtual grids. Virtual grids by Tesla. Look what's happening even with companies like Ford and Ford F-150, who's like turning their new electric truck into a battery for your house. So it's kind of like there's going to be disruption in the utility sector, tremendous disruption in the utility sector. And these companies are regarded as safe. I don't think they're safe. I think they have blind spots and they don't see what's going on. Look at Procter and Gamble. Let me move on to another company, Procter and Gamble. How is Procter and Gamble defending itself against influencers? If you follow the business news, famous influencers are launching their brand of consumer products like every other day, and they are targeting a narrow segment of their followers and selling their product to their followers exclusively through Shopify or more widely through Amazon if they have a more widespread online brand. Like what is the value of the moat of Procter and Gamble when distribution space is not the main thing of value anymore, right? When most people buy online, moats that are based on distribution, like Procter and Gamble, like Pepsi, like half of the business of Johnson and Johnson, these moats are going to die because if big box stores go away, which I happen to believe they inevitably will with Amazon and Shopify, I think shopping will be mostly experiential. Your mode of distribution also goes away because if you buy online, if you buy on Amazon or Shopify, you can buy the brand that means something to you. We are not in the era of TV dinners anymore, where everybody wakes up, watches TV, watches evening news, and watching the same advertising for the whole country. That's the reason why these brands emerge. These brands emerge powerful because of advertising, because of advertising on television, and everybody saw the same brand. So we created mass market brands called mass market advertising. Mass market advertising is going away. We're going on one-to-one advertising. An influencer today can reach a few thousand people who are likely to buy their product, and we're just going to sell their product to them. People are going to buy products that are meaningful to them. I think the brand mode is going to be very, very weak for companies like Procter and Gamble going forward. Very, very weak. And so what's going to happen to these dividends? What's going to happen to Pepsi? Pepsi's the same way. McDonald's. I could go on. I could go on. It's easy to find multiple disruptors for your average dividend stock. It's real easy. McDonald's. Here's another one. McDonald's. Well, okay. I don't have a problem with McDonald's, but what are they doing against DoorDash? There's real competition. People go to McDonald's to have fast food, to go in and out. Right? There's a fast food called In and Out. They go really, really fast. What if most people get everything delivered at home? Like if you follow world business news, you know that fast food is essentially dead in China. In China, you get everything delivered. I'm not saying it's going to be like that in the US, but what if it is? I mean, clearly, if you look at the market value of DoorDash, you realize that's going to be. So what does it mean? What does it mean if is McDonald's going to be disrupted with influencers like Mr. Beast creating their own burger and delivering their burger by a dasher? And these burgers, by the way, are made by ghost kitchens that have a nice 8 to 5 schedule for their cooks, that are fully automated, that are strategically spread out across towns. Like really, if experiential is the main thing that remains in physical business, which I believe it is, I believe physical business will be mostly run by highly experiential experiences, for lack of a better phrase. Anyways, I'm not sure people are gonna like the experience of McDonald's. Like I could make a case that a very high-end restaurant with a very polished server is always going to have a place, but you can't really invest in those. However, it's a big bet. It's a big bet to take here. So again, disruption is coming. Disruption is faster and faster. We have technologies converging, disrupting the old world, disrupting legacy businesses. And let me move on to that. Another one, what's the right question to ask? Right? Should you be trying to find companies that are just not going to die for 10 years? Should you try to find companies that are not going to grow, but that are going to still be around 10 years from now? Well, I would argue it's very hard to answer that question because you can't really predict the future. That's the lesser argument that I have, but the more important argument here is if you get this right, what is your return? Your return is 1.5x or 2x in 10 years. Like if you get it right, if you buy an old world company and they actually do just fine, don't grow too much, don't decline too much, stay about the same for 10 years, your maximum return is going to be 2 times. 1.5 times to 2 times. That's it. Right? So, gosh, that's high risk, low reward. That is high risk, low reward, knowing that startups are coming for incumbents. Incumbents are getting attacked by startups. So high risk, low reward. And then what's the other way around? To bet on a company that is going to disrupt an established industry in the next 10 years. That's, I would argue, and it's like baseball with unlimited pitches. You don't have to buy all of the disruptive companies. I would argue that some disruptive companies are very obvious, like Tesla. Tesla is so obvious. Some are harder, right? If you invest in like high level, highly abstract SaaS tech, some are harder to distinguish, but some are very obvious. You don't have to buy the harder ones. You can buy the very obvious ones, right? And so if you get it wrong and you buy a disruptive company, I will agree that your maximum downside could be you lose everything. And by the way, your maximum downside for buying an old established dividend paying company is also losing everything. So it's a tie here. But what's the upside? What's the upside of buying a disruptive company? Well, the upside could be a 10 or 100x nominal return. That could be your upside. You know, I spent all day preparing videos on Open Door. Why? Why do I care about Open Door? Because Open Door could be a 100x investment. So maximum downside, lose 100%. Maximum upside, make 10,000%. 10,000%. So it's like there is growth investing is an asymmetric bet by definition. It's by definition asymmetric to select growth. And if you look at the data, ever since the era of exponential cost curves, i.e. internet, i.e. microprocessors, anything that's silicon based, anything that's digital based. Like don't look at the data from, 1920s to today. That's cherry picking. And see, you still have people who cherry pick. That's cherry pick. I would look at recent data, and recent data is very, very, very clear. Or I would look at data since the very history of stocks. Because we've been through very disruptive periods before, and they are usually never included when people talk about stocks versus, when people talk about value versus growth. The most disruptive periods are almost never included. Like 1870 to 1910 is almost never included. And that was a period that was so disruptive as we have today. They had electricity. They had steel, they had oil, planes. What do we have? We have AI, we have smartphones, we have the solar revolution, we have the electric car revolution, we have the space revolution. genomics, blockchain. So it's like we are entering an era where growth is going to be absolutely insane, and so many companies are going to be disrupted. And I believe that over the long run, if you actually look at the history of business, since businesses have existed, the past 300 years, West India Company, if you look at the history of business, disruption has always paid off much, 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 much more than value and dividend paying. I really, really, really believe that. It's not a belief, actually. It's it's based on the data, based on what I've seen. So anyways, the issue of which business is going to be better, I think, is already in the camp of growth. Personal opinion, agree to disagree, happy to disagree. Good luck to everyone, and not investment advice. But I think there is another part to the story which is so important, which is why I named the channel Beat the Denominator. Most people think in nominal terms. And when investors think in real terms, they don't use the real rate of money growth. They use proxies like the CPI, which is greatly, greatly reduced compared to the actual rate of growth of the money stock. They don't use the rate of money growth. The rate of money growth is not used when they do inflation adjustments in these calculations. Like when you compare real terms to nominal terms, you have to use the right rate. And so it's all about what is the right rate. Well, to me, the right rate is the rate of monetary inflation. And that's monetary inflation is what they used to call inflation 50 years ago. 50 years ago, monetary inflation was the only inflation to speak of. Just before Milton Friedman, and perhaps the early days of Milton Friedman. And so, what is monetary inflation, right? Well, this is monetary inflation. If a stock goes up 15%, but the expansion of the money stock has also grown by 15%, i.e. there's 15% more dollars today than a year ago, and your stock is worth more 15% more today than a year ago, your return is zero. Your return is absolutely zero. You have not grown your share of the money stock. And think about how many stocks in the indexes, think about how many stocks in the S&P 500 do not return 15%. It's insane. Most stocks lose money, but they look like they make money. But most of them lose money. It's insane. It's insane. Okay? Each dollar, whenever you have a dollar in your hand or in your account, well, really in your hands, but that's for a different discussion. A dollar in your account is technically an IOU. But let's talk about a dollar in your hand, dollar bill in your hand. It represents a non-fixed, I want you to focus on that, non-fixed share of the money stock. Your share of a money stock decays in real terms. Because let's say if you own 0.0001% of all of the money in the world, and they double it through quantitative easing, they double it through commercial lending. If they double it, then you only have 0.00005% of the money stock. Your ownership of the money stock has been divided by 2. And the money stock is so important because everything we value in our lives is divided by the total money stock, right? You value your time. Do you value your time? Well, you exchange your time for money, theoretically. So money should be fixed, right? If you're spending time today, and if you're saving money from that time that you've exchanged for money, money should not be growing, right? You should have a fixed share of the money supply. But the money supply is growing. So, so if you keep cash, what do you have? Well, you have monetary inflation. Monetary inflation is the source of decay for everything, and it's not CPI. It is monetary inflation that matters. Is your share of all of the money in the world, is that share fixed? And that's why people love gold, because gold you only get diluted by about 1 to 2%. And I don't like gold, but that's for another video. Um, but that's why historically people have preferred gold. That's why we say things like an ounce of gold bought you a very expensive suit in the Roman Empire, and an ounce of gold today still buys you a very expensive suit. You've probably heard that quote. That's because your share of gold back then is about the same as your share of all the gold in the world today, because it's a limited resource on Earth that is very, very hard to extract, right? But money supply is not. Money stock is not. There's so much money, and if they grow the supply of money, you need to grow your investments faster than they grow the supply of money. I'm sorry to spend a lot of time on this, but again, that's why I created the channel, and so I invest my time in this channel. So I hope you don't mind me spending a little time on this. But anyways, uh, how good? So let's go with dividend investing. Back to the idea. Um, so I told you, if you the whole idea of dividend investing is if you buy a dividend stock and you hold it for 20 years, well, maybe it yields 2% today, but in 20 years it yields 20% on your money today, right? So you'd be like, oh, that's a great investment. That's a 10x. But what if, for example, the cost of bread, let's say in 2040, is $50, which is totally plausible at the rate at which we're going of inflation. You know what I mean? What if it costs $50? You know, what if a regular house in the US in 2040 costs $10 million? Which I don't have a problem imagining either. It's pointless. It's entirely pointless. You haven't kept up with monetary growth. You need to keep up with the growth of money. So that's why dividends are an illusion. They are a complete illusion because they do not have the top line growth that is necessary to beat the expansion of the money stock. They do not have it, you know? So I can think of no dividend stock who will exceed monetary inflation, except dividend stocks that are also disruptors, like Microsoft and Nvidia. But a dividend investor would never be interested in buying a stock like Nvidia. The return right now is like a 0.2 or 0.3% a year. They wouldn't be interested. So aside from tech stocks, I don't think we will exceed monetary inflation. And quite frankly, I think big tech will barely exceed monetary inflation. That's because they have pretty much captured their market. If you look at the market for online search, it's pretty much you know pretty much Google. I mean, Google owns everything, and so it's gonna grow at the pace of population growth. That makes sense. What I'm saying is it's like yeah, Google is expected to grow 10 to 15%. Well, that's pretty close to monetary inflation. So Google will show tremendous nominal return. It will look like you made money, but really you've just kept up with monetary inflation. Same for a lot of companies that are already leaders, right? If you buy Apple, if you buy Microsoft, if you buy Google, they are already the leaders in their fields. So they will grow probably at the pace of monetary inflation. As more money is printed, they'll get to charge more for their services. And thus they will retain their value. That's why the Nasdaq has been such a good investment. But the Nasdaq has mostly just retained its value if you really think about it. And so I estimate monetary inflation at about 15%. That's what I estimated at. And you may say 15% is too high. These were the numbers of 2020 because in 2020 they had to intervene and they had to go crazy on quantitative easing. The numbers are going to normalize. You may say these numbers are too high, and I think they're not too high. I think the debasement is actually conservative at 15%. It could be more than 15%. And so the Nasdaq has grown at about 15% in recent years. And I tell you, technically, you've not made money at all. And you may tell me, well, that's not true. Obviously, I've made quite a bit of money with the Nasdaq. And if you say that, that's probably because you're looking at the CPI and you're not looking at monetary inflation. Because monetary inflation monetizes rare, great assets first. Real estate on the beach, a great house in a great community in a very expensive part of town, art, land. That's these items that are very desirable for everyone. I could go on. I could talk about perhaps some types of college education. I could talk about the cost of healthcare. The things that are truly hard to create. Those things have grown by 15% a year for at least the past 10 years. Just like the Nasdaq, they have grown this much. Great real estate is so much more expensive today than it was 10 years ago. It's so much more expensive. Great art. Don't even get me started on great art. High quality food. High quality wine. All of that kind of stuff has pretty much grown in line with monetary inflation. The reason why you may say, oh, well, that's not true is because, well, perhaps you buy items that are reflected by the CPI. Like if you, for example, the CPI uses rent. Well, yeah, it's true. Rent haven't gone up that much. That's because you don't own the property if you rent. And there's regulations on rent. There's a lot of things on rent which makes rent not go as much. Industrial food may not have grown as much. But the CPI does not take into account the true rate of monetary inflation. Only the money stock does. And each of us, we are going to have very different inflation rates. If you are a worker who has very few expenses and you're a saver and you want to invest in stocks, and 80% of your expense are in stock and in highly desirable assets, well, then your inflation rate is very close to monetary inflation. That makes sense. It's like if most of your income and revenue is going to be, say, to buy assets. Well, assets are still fairly expensive, certain types of assets, compared to what they were 10 years ago. I would argue they're not expensive at all compared to what they're going to be worth. Because the disruption assets on which I focus in this channel, I have two directions enhancing their returns. On the one hand, they are disruptive. They are going after legacy companies. And on the other hand, the denominator is growing at an unprecedented pace. It's growing really fast. And so we're going to have growth in the denominator and growth in the numerator. How valuable the company is going to become more valuable, and the dollar is going to become less valuable, which means that your nominal returns will probably be very high. Not investment advice. So let me just quickly show this chart. I actually spent perhaps half a day making this chart and getting into the data. And this is also something that I think is important to go back to, because whenever people talk about monetary supply, they always talk about M2 monetary stock. It's always the M2 money stock, because that's the US financial system. And they very often forget the eurodollar system. And my calculation, so I went back to a lot of articles and tried to tried to estimate the size of the eurodollar system, and it's very dark. The eurodollar system is very, very dark. It's all offshore. It's outside of a US system. If you're an expert in that, I'd love to talk to you because it's tough. But the eurodollar system, per my estimate, has now grown bigger than the US financial system. There's more money, there are more dollars being created by commercial banks outside of the US than inside the US. And this really matters because as commercial banks create dollars or as they do currency swaps with the Fed and those dollars are held in foreign banks, they make it back to the US. It's all interconnected. Like a eurodollar does not necessarily always stay abroad, and a dollar in the US does not necessarily always stay in the US. Like these are interconnected. So that's why it really matters because right now, and you may see at this chart, the Fed really slowed down quantitative easing, right? We are quantitative tightening, and they really sped it up here during the events of 2020 and 2021. So, which is why we've had this tremendous inflation. And now I believe they're bluffing, and there's two reasons for that. One of them is the eurodollar system is still printing. I mean, there's no stop to that. First of all, and then second of all, the M2 money stock, when the deficit in 2023 is going to be very high, the Fed is going to have to move back to QE. They're going to have to move back to QE because the deficit is not going to be, quote, only 1 trillion. No, it's going to be much higher. It's going to be so much higher. Revenues, revenues from capital gains, revenues from jobs are going to be so down for fiscal year 2022. And they didn't adjust. They didn't adjust any of their predictions. None. And every other day, they spend a $10 billion. They spend $10 billion every other day. All of it's going to the deficit. I believe the deficit is going to be at least 2 trillion. And there will not be buyers. Will not be enough buyers in the open market for these bonds. There won't. Japan is selling bonds to support its currency. China is not buying bonds. So the buyer of last resort will be the Fed. And if the buyer of last resort is the Fed, that means QE is back because the Fed has to put back in QE to buy those bonds. I mean, the Fed can't even sell the bonds. So we will be back at 15% a year in monetary inflation at least. And it likely won't show in the CPI. Because the CPI is looking at a lot of products that are industrially made and that are deflationary in nature, made by companies that make things cheaper. And the CPI is filled with hedonic adjustments. Oh, this product is much better. Therefore, even though the product XYZ costs 3 times as much, because it's much better, in some way, we're going to actually put it down in the CPI as something that costs less. So I'll do a video on the CPI and monetary inflation of the difference because that fascinates me. I'm very fascinated by that. So anyways, the point is, if we go back to a 15% a year growth in the denominator, i.e. the thing that we divide our entire economy with, the thing that we trade with, right? If we grow it at 15%, then you better invest in companies that grow really fast. That's the only way. That's the only way you're even going to stay afloat. That's why I like to say my minimum threshold for a tech stock is actually 30%. And not even just tech stock, like a growth stock in general. I don't only buy tech. But it has to be at least 15%. 30%, sorry. Because if I get 30%, it's going to be like that, right? And if I get 30%, what that means is that I'm at least guaranteed a 15% a year in real terms and not in nominal terms, right? And so also, this is another point. Think about all of the malinvestment that's going on. because of that. Because companies think, oh, we had a good year, revenues up 7%. No, you had a terrible year. If your revenues up 7% and money stock grew 15%, you had a big down year, a tremendously big down year. Your revenue dropped 8%. There's a fire. Your company's in deep trouble because you only grew 7% and you're like down 8% in real terms. But people don't think in real terms, but they will. They will think in real terms. You know, look at what's happening in countries like like Turkey, like Lebanon. I don't want to take Argentina. Everybody talks about Argentina, so I don't want to use Argentina. But it's like look at what's happening in Turkey. Poor man in Turkey went to jail because he put his savings into 50 cars because he thought cars would depreciate less fast than the Turkish lira. I could go on. I could go on. So we need to have a keen understanding of the growth of the money stock and the growth of the denominator whenever we make investment decisions. Because if we just invest for dividends, we are going to be forced to invest in low growth companies. And these low growth companies are not going to keep up with monetary inflation. So businesses' top line growth should exceed the hurdle rate of money. They should exceed that hurdle rate. If not, firms are losing money in real terms. And your business needs to make money in real terms. So that's the conclusion of this video. I had so much more to say. I had so much more to say about this. Another issue with dividend as well is that you're obviously paying taxes when you get a dividend payment. And a growth stock, obviously, as long as you haven't sold, you are not paying taxes. And in growth investing, you're going to have losers. I mean, it's mandatory. You're going to have losers, and so those losers can offset gains. So you end up paying little to no taxes on the component of your portfolio that you have to sell because those losses make up for those gains. So that's another consideration for another video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry, but I went all in on the denominator today. That's the part that I care about. Thank you for your support. None of this has been investment advice. Don't forget to subscribe and like and follow me on Twitter if you can. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you.